Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Brockwell Park Community Greenhouses Gardeners question time for Saturday, the 23rd of May. Before we get started, a brief apology. I'm afraid we're going to be running a little bit short today. We're going to be bringing the show to a close in around half an hour. Fabrice from Myers Field, who is going to be our special guest for this afternoon, unfortunately is having real kind of audio-visual issues, and rather than try and sort those out on the fly, we've been doing our best for the sort of 20 minutes leading up to the show. We've made the executive decision to postpone his feature until next Saturday, when we'll figure out a slightly better internet setup for him so that we can talk to him properly without it kind of constantly cutting in and out. So we're going to dive straight in with this week's questions. It's not going to be a super jam-packed show, I'm afraid, but we'll answer questions that have been sent in the interim week. And everybody that's watching live, you can always either put your questions to me in the chat and I will read them out, or you will find if you've just joined the show that you are automatically on mute, just to keep the audio-visual setup running as smoothly as possible. Please feel free to unmute yourself at the appropriate instant and give your question to me. I am this week's expert panel, me on my own. I'm hoping that Fabrice may be able to join us in a slightly limited capacity within the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes, but I am not hopeful. Zoom is, a wonderful format for these interesting times. But it's probably not the kind of audio-visual suite you would expect from, say, the original Gardeners Question Time on Radio 4, for example. So we'll do the best we can. I'm going to dive straight in with the questions that have been submitted over the week. And the first thing I'm going to do is, last week we finished on, once again, we had a Rita cliffhanger. Rita asked us about her precious variegated boxbush, which unfortunately has the dreaded blight. She's already removed the tips that were the worst, but there are still a few obviously infected branches and leaves remaining. If Rita were here right now, I would give her an opportunity to maybe give us a few more details before I tell her what she almost certainly does not want to hear. And that is that box blight is a real bugger, and you are really going to struggle to do anything constructive with it. There is a reason why it is such a dreaded and feared infection. There is some stuff to be done. What I would preface this sort of little rant that I'm going to go on is that, as with many severe infections of ornamental plants, it really is a question that the question you have to ask yourself is, how much joy and pleasure am I getting from this particular plant, and what are the risks that it poses to the rest of my garden, and how do I weigh that against the amount of work that I'm going to have to do in order to potentially preserve it. Box blight is, understandably, a dreaded infection for what used to be, at least, an extraordinarily popular ornamental hedge. The Buxus species is just fantastic for doing what most people want it for, which is creating these very neat, low ornamental hedges that look fantastic. They're fantastic for every kind of border, whether it's a formal or an informal garden. But Cylindrocardum buxicola, I think I've got that right, it's just one of those things that most of us kind of cross their fingers and hope that it doesn't happen to them. If it does happen to you, there are some things that you can try. But again, I would preface this with, it is extraordinarily infectious, and most frustratingly, it is an extremely durable fungus. The spores can remain viable and ready to spring back into life and create new infections on fallen leaf litter for literally years, like upwards of 5 years. And so the first thing to do, as with any kind of fungal infection, is to remove and destroy, and by destroy, I mean kill with fire, the infected tissue. With box blight, what you want to do is cut it back well beyond the obviously infected area. The fungus does not reach the roots. So the biggest suggestion that I would say is really, 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 really cut it back. The suggested sort of trimming scenario a couple of years ago used to be reduce the height by at least half. But I would suggest probably cutting it back to stumps. The good thing is that box bushes respond quite well to pruning. I mean, part of the reason why they make such wonderful ornamental low hedges is that they bounce back, they respond well to constant clipping and shaping. But my suggestion would be, unless you want to fight a desperate and, let's be honest, probably losing battle with box blight for years to come, in which case you are probably going to spend a lot of time looking at your treasured variegated box bush in various stages of sad decay, which obviously is no fun for anybody. Be ruthless, trim it all the way back. Trim it back basically to stumps. You can do this at so right back to ground level. So you're really, just a tiny little bit is showing above the ground. You can do this at any time, but the pathogen kind of thrives in wet conditions. So if you're doing it in sort of a damper time of year, one thing you just have to be really careful of is it is extremely infectious. So your garden hygiene is going to have to be absolutely on point if you are if you're going to stand any chance at all of curbing the infection for good. So that means that you really need to have your sort of your destruction scenario accounted for ahead of time. How are you going to dispose of this diseased material? How are you going to clean your tools? How are you going to preserve garden hygiene? And that is up to and including things like the soles of your boots, even just tramping around a wet garden when you've been moving in and out of your hedges while you're trimming them back. That is enough to spread the spores. There's a reason why it's so dreaded, and it's just because it's so durable and so infectious. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what you're going to do with that diseased material to make sure that you're not just carrying that disease around and spreading it around your garden. Then trim it all the way back to stumps would be my suggestion. You may find, if you search, certainly if you look on the RHS website, they have a kind of a staggered series, a sort of triage set of solutions, which get deeper and deeper in their severity. I would say skip to the end and go to the most severe one, because there's nothing more frustrating than doing, saying sort of tier 1 solution where you've trimmed it all the way back and you've removed as much of the diseased material as you can manage, and you've cut it back a little bit further, and you think, God, I hope that works out. And then in a few months' time, you notice that the disease is really taking hold again, and you have to do the whole thing again until eventually the plant is just too stressed that it cannot recover. So if you, my suggestion would be, go in for the kill as much as you possibly can. Cut it all the way back. Do it in a dry time of year. Make sure that you've got sort of a tarpaulin or some sheeting down before you start clipping, to make sure, just partly to make clearing up just easier, but also to make sure that those dislodged leaves and other debris is not touching the soil. And then destroy everything. Get rid of everything. Even just a few leaves sticking around will be enough to bring the infection back. And also get rid of the top sort of layer of soil under the plants as well, because there will definitely be spores and infected material in there as well. So remove that soil, replace with fresh soil, and then probably mulch it as well. There are fungicides that you can use. Again, if you head to the RHS website, they have a couple of recommendations. You have to use them. You have to be quite careful with the weather. What you want basically is an extended dry period, but we're not in lots of bright sunshine, right? So you want after the rains, hopefully the plants are, had a recent irrigation, but you don't want to spray and then have it rain in the short term afterwards. But at the same time, if you spray when the sun is out, it's going to lead to scorch, and it's also the fungicide is not going to be as effective. I'm afraid, Rita, that my personal recommendation would be find something else to put there. There are alternatives to box hedging. There are plenty of native tree species that actually do quite well in terms of low hedging, even stuff like yew. Do some research and find something that you like, and kind of go in for a penny and in for a pound on those. I only say that because I know plenty of people that have fought, a desperate rearguard battle against box blight for years, because they really love the look of their garden with those low hedges, and they don't want to give it up. And in the end, they have to, and kind of admit defeat. And it just means that, they spent a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of love as well, right? It's sad to see species that you really like and really care for sort of fade away and then eventually have to be removed. So as much as it makes me a bit of a cynic, my advice is to cut that cord early on, find something to replace it with, dig it all out, really, really sterilize the ground as much as you can, do everything that you possibly can to remove all that infected material, work on your garden hygiene. It's even more virulent than you might expect. So yeah, think about how you clean your tools, how you clean your boots, what you put down, even, you know, what you kneel on when you're trimming those hedges, and come up with a new solution. But yes, if you're determined to keep it, then there are, you know, a set of tiers of interventions that you can make, and they all involve just cutting it back really ruthlessly. It's just how ruthless you're going to be. Yeah, cut it back, destroy the infected material, be very, you know, vigilant in doing that. And then yes, there are fungicides available, but I suspect that those box hedges are very much on their way out in terms of fashionable planting, and we probably will not see them again for a generation or so, just because box blight is unfortunately such a sticky wicket to bat off. So I'm afraid, I wish I had better news for you, Rita, but that is my advice. Yeah, it's probably not what you wanted to hear. But as I said, if you're determined to interdict and to try and save them, you definitely can. But yeah, make sure you clean everything. Make sure everything is sterilized all the way through. Otherwise, it's just going to come straight back. Right. So moving on to our next question. I've got a couple of questions from Julianne. Sorry that we didn't get to talk about these last week. We just ran out of time. The first is, I have a weeping cherry tree. The leaves are getting brown and crispy, and they did the same last year. Some of them have black dots on them. Is this too little water? Whether or not the tree's irrigation needs are being met. Oh, hold on. I can just see that Rita is about to join the chat. So I'm going to briefly summarize again what I just said. She's not going to be pleased, but don't worry. I will. We won't do the whole thing again. I can once this meeting is over and becomes a hangout at the end. I will chat to her in greater detail then. So back to Julianne's weeping cherry trees. The irrigation needs of a tree, if the tree is probably more than 2 or 3 years old, it really ought to be surviving on its own. You shouldn't really need to water it unless the environmental conditions are really, really arid and really, really dry. So based on the symptoms, especially if it's coming back, if it did the same thing last year, it sounds very much to me like cherry leaf scorch, which is another fungal infection. The best way of identifying this is in the autumn, when it should drop the leaves, do a lot of them kind of stick around and remain on the tree over winter. That's a really good identification diagnostic tool for something like cherry leaf scorch, because that fungal infection will actually remain in those leaves and it will overwinter in those leaves, which is why they don't drop. Regardless of what it definitely sounds like a fungal infection of some sort. Regardless of what the specific pathology turns out to be, you need to collect and destroy those leaves, especially if they do not drop in the autumn when they ought to, because that is basically just an incubation area for the disease to come back in spring. So yeah, prune those off and destroy them. Regardless, it's possible that the plant is also under water stress as well, right? Like it's been a phenomenally dry spring, and it was actually quite a dry, it may not have felt that way, but it was actually quite a dry winter as well. And although we've had sort of big dumps of precipitation over the last couple of months, sort of every few weeks, because the ground is so dry, if that ground is anyway compacted at all, then that water is probably not reaching down to the roots. Mature trees, the root shadow goes quite deep, and so it's possibly that they're just, the water's not getting down. So irrigate it and see what happens. But it sounds very much to me like cherry leaf scorch or a fungal infection of some kind. So the best thing you can do is remove the really curled up and crispy looking leaves, especially if they don't drop when they're supposed to in autumn. Julianne has also got another question about, she's got another tree. Let's have a look. I also have a bronze colored elder tree, masses of black fly on every branch and twig, and they're making everything around it sticky too. Any ideas for treating it at this scale? It's about 2 meters high and 1.5 meters across. Any tips? Right. So elders are traditionally fairly tough trees. So one thing you can do is chop some of them branches off. Like if they're really, 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 really infested and it's absolutely covered in those black fly, you can just maybe chop off some of the branches and destroy them. But again, you don't want to go crazy because obviously there is a limit to even what the hardiest trees can survive. You will find that this is the time of year for really big black fly breakouts to occur. And that is just because the weather is super hot. Basically, the natural cycle has not caught up yet. There are natural predators in the environment. Ladybirds are a chief one among them. That will see a similar population explosion in the local area as their food source increases. So a lot of what you're doing is just trying to allow some time for the tree to kind of catch up. You're trying to do your best to preserve and help it meet its energy requirements until the natural environment, supplies those predators that are going to come and eat those aphids for you. In the meantime, at that scale, yeah, it can be really, really tough. So there are a variety of anti-aphid sprays that you can buy. Diluted washing up liquid is always one that is always suggested, and that's probably, if it's like a really, if it's a significant infestation, that's probably a good idea. The other thing that I would suggest, you mentioned that that kind of infection is making everything else sticky too. Have a look and see if it's covered in ants, because you will find that so black fly are a species of aphids that are actively farmed by ants. They harvest the honeydew that those aphids produce and use that as a food source. You can buy ant collars, which are sort of sticky plastic runners that go around the base of the tree, hopefully without constricting it too much. And the purpose of that is literally just to stop the ants being able to climb up the trunk to reach their farms. If you can stop the ants farming the aphids, the conditions for them will slightly go down, and that will give the tree a little bit of opportunity to recover. But yeah, to a certain extent, black fly infestations, you just have to tolerate them, in that you have to try and preserve the tree as much as you can. Try and reduce the infestation as much as you can. If it's really if they're bursting from the branches and leaves, one thing you can do is just scrape them off. Just use your thumbnail and just push them. And if you think that you can make a significant reduction in the overall number of aphids on the tree, then by all means go ahead and do that. The fact that you said that the tree is 2 meters high and 1.5 meters across means that is probably impractical. But if the tree is 2 meters high and that far across, I mean, it sounds like it's well on its way to maturity. And to a certain extent, these infections or these infestations rather will happen every year. It is kind of part of the natural cycle of the natural world. And for really big, tall, healthy trees and parks and stuff, those infestations are going on. They're just happening, way above our eye level, and so we don't necessarily notice them. So what you're really trying to do is give the tree a chance until natural predators kind of catch up. So spray it with organic sprays if you can manage that. What I would suggest is, if you can do the diluted washing up liquid method, get one of those sort of pump pressure sprayers, the ones that are sort of the size of like a small pot, and see if you can't use the pressure to get up there. You can also thumb over a hose, just blast them off. If they're right at the tips and and the tree is not looking too sad, you can just blast them off, some of them off with a hose. You're really just trying to reduce the numbers. Natural predators can do the work for you. But as I said, elders are notoriously tough trees. So you can prune them as well if the infestation is extremely severe. But beyond that, black fly are unfortunately just one of those pernicious parts of horticulture, and the best you can do is to limit the infestation until the predators come back and the tree has a chance to survive on its own. So that is everything that I've got in terms of questions from the previous week. I'm just going to say hello to Rita, if she can hear me. I can see that she's disappeared from her seat. I'm afraid I've got some pretty bad news in terms of box blight, Rita, which we can probably discuss once the show is done. We're coming up to past. As I said, it's going to be a shorter show today. So just an opportunity to, if there's anyone watching live that's got a question that they would like to share, you can either drop that in the chat and I will read it out, or please take yourself off on mute and make yourself known, and you can ask me now.
Yes, I do.
Amy, please, go
hello.
ahead.
I have a question. I have I think it's a Camellia japonica in my garden for many years, and every year the leaves are really green and vibrant and there's new growth, but when the flower is about to bloom, it kind of looks really beautiful. It's just about to bloom, and then as it's about to expand, it goes brown and falls off and dies. And this has happened year in and year out. And I just wondered, is it because it's in too much sun? Does it need to be moved? Is it unwell?
So, I mean, that sounds, off the top of my head, that sounds very much like, and I hate to sound like a broken record this week, but it sounds like a fungal disease. It sounds like petal blight, which affects camellia flowers. I mean, the one thing when they turn brown, this is so just after they bloom, and then do they fall off in like pretty much straight away, like 1 or 2 days?
Yes.
And does it look like a brown flower, I guess is what I'm trying to say, rather than it sort of immediately rotting? Does it still have the kind of the lovely camellia sort of shape, but the color drains out and it goes like quite an unhealthy?
It just sort of not really. It just kind of falls apart instantly, almost, and then sometimes the buds as well, even before they're about to go out, go brown before they've even got to that stage as well, and then eventually they just fall off. But it doesn't look like a brown flower. It just disintegrates as soon as it.
I mean, that's, oh God, I imagine that must be terribly frustrating. Beautiful
it's
flowers,
really ugly.
Watching them, and then watching them develop, and then, I mean, so you can tell if it's petal blight, because if you find the sort of the veins in the petals, in the individual petals themselves, if those veins will go like quite sort of dark brown color, it looks like a kind of the sort of vampiric infection that you would get in a movie as people's veins kind of change color. You can tell if it's that kind of, but it does sound, I mean, off the top of my head, I would say it's almost certainly that.
Right.
As with most fungal infections, it's not caused, but it's certainly exacerbated by too much moisture. And that is normally to do with ventilation. I guess what I would suggest is next year, because I suspect it's probably too late this year, right? I think probably most of the flowers will have probably turned brown and fallen off.
I mean, they keep going.
So the best thing that you can do sort of in the interim, and obviously, I would say sort of late autumn or early spring is normally the best time to prune mature perennials anyway, is try and open it up a little bit, especially in its sort of surrounding area, because the main thing you're trying to do is just improve the ventilation to the plants. If there's anything you can do to cut back surrounding perennials, just to allow a little bit more of a breeze to come through, or if it's a really sort of bushy, and you said that the leaves look very healthy and green and stuff like that, it's possible that you may be able to just prune and thin that out a little bit just to improve ventilation overall. That will hopefully sort of deny the fungal infection the conditions that it needs to spread so voraciously. There are what's called foliar fungicide, which you can spray every 2 or 3 weeks. But the other thing, again, is just as soon as you see them going brown, especially if you see them going brown in the bud, is to chop them off and destroy them somehow, to burn them, and make sure you disinfect your tools. I can't remember if petal blight is one of those ones that overwinters, but basically what you're trying to do is it's going to be something of a war of attrition, where you're trying to improve the overall conditions to make it harder for the fungus to come back, and then you are just basically trying to limit the symptoms of infection and stop it from spreading from flower to flower. That's the best suggestion that I can have. It's probably going to take a little bit of work, and it's unlikely that next year you're going to get beautiful camellia flowers. But the fact that the overall bush seems to be healthy is obviously a really good sign. and indicates that this is hopefully certainly a treatable condition, if not a solvable one.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite big and it is quite hemmed in, so there isn't probably much. It's got the bushes side to
so
side.
I suspect that probably what's happening is that there's a lot of moisture in that immediate area, and that is giving the fungus this fantastic conditions, which is why it's coming back so successfully year on year. So open it up a little bit. Choose the right time of year to wait until the plant is dormant before you do anything. You do any chopping, and try not to do anything too drastic. But if you can also thin out perennials on either side and give it just a little bit more, literally a little bit more breathing space, that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
No problem. Hi, Rita.
Yeah, I did hear what you said. You've got bad news about what?
Well, I was going back to the question you asked last week about your variegated box bush. God. Yeah. And unfortunately, you missed the early part of this show where I gave a real screed, and I am afraid it's probably not great news. But what we're going to do today, Rita, is we're going to have a slightly shorter show because unfortunately, Fabrice, our special guest, is having kind of technical issues. So when I bring the show to a close, rather than repeating it all for the rest of the guests, I will chat to you about it at the end.
All right.
So that's almost everything that we have. I'm just going to do our standard kind of quick plug for everything that goes on at the greenhouses. If you went onto the BPCG website today, you will notice that there are, I think, 4 online events going on Saturday. There's yoga, there's our fermentation workshops, there's all sorts of stuff happening. So we are still very much kind of open for business, even as the government advice on sort of post-lockdown is confusing. Rita, you've got a question.
I'm very interested in fermentation. How do I do the fermentation, learn about because I do my own, but I'd like to see what this lady does.
Right. So actually, if you head to the BPC website at the moment, I actually uploaded a video yesterday where Yelena runs through how to make a fermented watermelon gazpacho, which is delicious, and obviously it's been hot as anything this week, and so it's an excellent thing to try and make. But in terms of the actual workshops themselves, tickets are on sale. It's a ticketed event, and at the moment, this is one of these kind of online events are basically our primary source of income, right? As we are currently closed to the public. Tickets are on sale for 2 or 3 weeks before the event starts. They are regular events. They're running at least once a month, probably more often. Okay. Yelena's workshops are almost always on Saturday at 11 a.m. It's at least an hour long, and it's a Zoom meeting very much like this, right? So she will be on the main screen. She will run through everything that you need to know, and obviously when you sign up for those events, she will give you some information about what she's going to be specifically doing that week. Anyone else that's interested, I would heartily recommend it. If you've ever had any of Yelena's kombucha, you will know that she absolutely knows what she's talking about. So online events abound at BPCG. If you are missing a little bit of the sort of the community aspect and especially the live music, I just finished this week on the BPCG website and the YouTube channel. There are 3 collections of live music that's been recorded over the last couple of years. I called it Lockdown Listening, and that's just a very pleasant time as well. The videos are sort of 5 to 10 minutes and are like a nice compilation of various bands and artists that we've welcomed at the greenhouses and we'll hopefully see again very soon. I'm going to draw this meeting to a close now. I appreciate it's been a very comparatively short one. Next week, if you are here or you're watching this on YouTube, Fabrice will be back. We've got a lovely video that Helen is making in Norfolk about some friends of hers that have started a market garden and sort of what that sort of process is like when you've just started it and COVID has just hit. So I expect it to be a jam-packed show and will certainly make up for the slight dearth of content this week. So I'm going to unless we have any more questions, I'm going to bring this episode to a close. And
Who was the guest? Who was your guest?
So I was hoping to welcome Fabrice, who works at Myatt's Yard, and he is going to talk to us. So he's going to talk to us about a seedling distribution scheme that Myatt's are running in the Cold Harbour ward. And he also used to be community gardener at BPCG before my time. But yeah, and obviously is a fantastic horticulturist as well. So I'm also hoping to put some general questions to him, and he's going to talk about some sort of seasonal tips for the garden as well. So yeah, lots worth tuning in for next week. So we hope to see you again then. Thank you very much for now, and yeah, we'll see you in a week.
Bye, Amy. Bye, everyone.
Bye.